But I think that's what crossing over to the other side is. Faith is knowing that Christ is in the boat. Hey everyone, Angelo here. And it's a 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time. So we're in chapter 4 of Mark. And this comes after a day where Jesus spent all day teaching. He was in a boat teaching. And then as it comes down to evening, he says to the disciples, let's cross over to the other side. But when that happens, in the middle of the night, there's this big, massive storm. And Jesus is in the boat laying there asleep, so the disciples wake him up like, waiters, you don't care? And then Christ calms the storm. But then he looks at them and he's like, what happened to all you? You know, how could you have so little faith? And the story ends with the disciples questioning and asking each other, who could this person be? And you know what I find very striking is that before the disciples could get to the other side, they were there questioning who Christ was. You know, on one side, they had this entire day of teaching, and they probably thought they had a solid understanding of him already. And yet, before they could get to the other side, everything that they thought they understood was in question again. And it's similar because a lot of times whenever we think we might have things figured out, something shows us that we don't. And here, it is very much an example like the storms in our lives. And it's understandable that the disciples were afraid, especially given that Mark's gospel is about inspiring the early Christian community to hope, and all of us included. I imagine the place was super dark, you know, and the unsure was taking place. There's just commotion and bacchanal everywhere, you know, no sort of rhythm or predictability, really. And it's very allegorical to how we experience our lives sometimes. You know, the other boats in the water, they might not have even realized how or why the storm ended. Yet they might have been praying to God all the same for the storm to end and for their safety on the water. It's ironic, though, that the boats without Christ in it, they're praying that God could end the storm. Whereas the boat with Christ in it, that's the boat without any faith. And does that sound familiar? Panic is a way of making us do irrational things, so. And like the disciples here, for example, and I mean, it's to be expected, you know, given that we go into survival mode. And is wired in us instinctually. I mean, it's a necessary part of the human condition. Without it, we may not have been around it today. But you think waking Jesus up wasn't the irrational thing to do, but the way they did it was with the accusations and with the hysteria. And if we believe that we are better than that, then faith is a necessary component to be better than that. And if we believe that were we in the same position, we would act the same way, then same way, faith is still necessary. So a question to ask is, what is faith? And I would invite you to contemplate what it is for your own self, your own perspective of it in your life. For me, though, faith doesn't mean being without fear. Faith is knowing that Christ is in the boat. Faith is knowing that Christ can calm the storm. Faith is having a spirit that embraces the struggles and acts accordingly because Christ is there with us. And that spirit is the Holy Spirit. And I'm not intending to glorify suffering in any way. But unfortunately, suffering is a fact of life. So I would say let's embrace it. Embrace it with the Spirit of God in us. And next question to ask, though, how to have faith? And I'll use an answer that came from a recent conversation I was having with a friend of mine. This is Dominic Chiddick. He is a young person with a heart full of soul and curiosity. And during that conversation, what came up is you just do it by doing it. Simple as that. And what that means is that you live your life trusting that God will have your back. And it requires a lot of prayer and a lot of humility. And if you don't know how to pray, then I would suggest try sitting in silence for a few minutes and see what comes up. Because sometimes the only prayer that we can pray is to listen. Or emotional breakdowns. Sometimes those prayers happen too. And still all fine and well and good. God understands and hears all prayers. But I think that's what crossing over to the other side is. Moving from little hope to lots of faith. And there's this activist in the States, Mariam Carbon, and she said, well, multiple times, but in this one interview that I remember reading, that she learned this thing from a Catholic nun, where hope is a practice and a discipline. It's not a feeling. Same way too, I would say faith is also a discipline and a practice. Because I imagine the storm would have blocked out any light that the disciples would have seen. And discipline means knowing that we mightn't always see the light. And just because we don't always see the light doesn't mean that the light isn't there. Discipline is trusting that the light is there in the obscurity, behind the clouds, and in the fog. And we have faith that the light is there because we have seen it. We trust that the light is there. Because how many times have we seen the light of God in our own lives? Like, think about it. Like, really and truly think about it. We could trust that God is there in the boat with us. We would have all experienced God's presence in our lives at some point. And trusting that God is there, having that faith leads to action. And faith in action is what changes the world. And examples of faith in action, besides things like religious orders and ecclesial movements, are parents and families who struggle to raise their youth, and they do the best they can with what they have. It may not be perfect, but still trying their best. Examples of faith in action are movements like Black Lives Matter. Examples of faith in action are people like Martin Sergio and Michael Woodruff on the ground, not just with their parishioners, but with the people of their community. The people of faith are the ones who calm the storms of the world. And they echo Christ's words to us too. Quiet now, be calm. So, when our lives turn to evening, when our lives turn to darkness, and when our darkness has storms in it, we can have faith, knowing that the storm will be calmed. Anyway, that's it from me this week. As always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.